So our aim today is to offer some insights into what's next for property and what buyers should be looking for going forward. Before we start, I'd like to iterate that the advice given and comments made by the external panellists joining us today are their own expert opinions and not necessarily those of the Berkeley Group. Firstly, I'd like to introduce today's experts, who bring with them a wealth of experience and knowledge of property market. I'd like to introduce to you Jazdeep Singh, who is a solicitor with Manax here in Kent. Jazz, would you mind giving us a brief introduction to yourself?
Hi, thanks Nat for that. My name's Jazz. I'm one of the directors here at Manax Solicitors. We're a 3-office firm based in and around Kent, and I head up the residential conveyancing department.
Thanks, Jazz. And next up, we have Matt Coulson, who works for Heron Financial. Matt, can you please tell us about what it is that you do?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name's Matt. I run a mortgage business, Heron Financial. We specialise in new builds, look after lots of clients with regards to the Help to Buy scheme, shared ownership scheme, and anything else in between. We've been running now for just about 10 years, so lots of experience in new build and beyond. Really excited to be taking part. Thank you.
Great, thanks Matt. And next we have Chelsea Gunn from Moving Made Easy. What does your company do, Chelsea?
Thank you for that, Natalie. So I'm Chelsea, I'm from Moving Made Easy, and I'm one of the senior account managers here, and we are the UK's largest independent provider for all part exchanges and assisted moves. And I personally have the pleasure of looking after several different Berkeley regions here.
That's wonderful, thank you. Also here with us today, we have Tom Bryant, who joins us from Savills in Kent. Tom, I'm not sure that Savills needs too much in the way of an introduction, but if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Natalie. My name's Tom Bryant. I am director responsible for the residential development sales department across the southeast, covering Kent and East Sussex. We provide consultancy services for developers as well as agency advice and work for developers such as Berkeley.
That's great, thanks Tom. And lastly, but no means least, we have Kate Faulkner joining us this afternoon. Thank you for being here today, Kate. Can you please tell us about your experience in the property sector?
Yes, so I'm not an expert at anything, but I am a master of all trades when it comes to property. So I set up one of the first property portals through a competition I did with an MBA. I've worked in relocation, so we've done relocated lots of big companies, corporates, and the people that work for them, like Pfizer, Cadbury, and BP. A bit like Chelsea, actually, I used to work with a part exchange company. We used to buy and sell around 100 properties a year, so that was a big learning curve. I then set up the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre in Swindon to help people build their own homes and renovate. And while I was doing all of that, I also happened to write for 10 years the property books for which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I really run a consulting company, so doing things like I'm doing today, and helping companies to talk to consumers and to create new products and services. And I run a site called propertychecklist.co.uk, free to consumers. You can ask me any question you like and we will get you an answer. And you might find me popping up on the media every now and again in your living room. So apologies if that frightens you one morning to hear my voice yet again.
Many thanks, everyone. So we are going to kick off today's session with some insights and then move on to an open Q&A. So please do feel free to post your questions on the Q&A function at any point, and we will do our best to get through as many as possible in the latter half of this webinar. So let's get started. To set the scene, it would be useful to lay out where we are now, especially after the last few years. So can you give us a quick summary of the current landscape and where we are at the moment? So Kate, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we've seen over the last few months, which none of us expected, was this massive growth in buyer demand. We thought everybody would come out of COVID and think, right, we're staying where we are, we're worried about moving, etc. That did not happen. So what you can see on the first chart here is this is for some stats from Rightmove, and this shows you the percentage change in sales agreed this year versus last year. So interestingly, it's not across the board though. So for properties that are a little bit cheaper, 100 to 200,000, there's been a 20% increase. We'd have all been happy with that. But of course, in the higher price brackets, partly because of the stamp duty holiday that was announced early on, we've seen a 100% increase in sales agreed from 4 to 500,000. And then if you have a little look on the right, what you can see is that, again, Scotland and Wales, they've lagged a little behind on the increase in sales agreed, for the simple reason that their markets didn't open as soon as ours, and they've had slightly earlier, certainly Wales had a slightly earlier lockdown. And look at that variety in terms of the number of sales agreed by region. So really one thing that I would say to you is that whatever you kind of hear from the media, and they do love talking about property stats, is remember that any averages they give you, there's very individual things going on. So it might be the higher price brackets they're talking about, not the one you're in. It might be where sort of Great Britain they're concentrating on, whereas you're in Wales. You might find that things are that little bit different. And if we pop onto the next slide, basically what you have seen here is, yes, there is definitely some view of wanting to change, because of course if you're locked up for a couple of months in somewhere where you can't get out and couldn't have that open space, or you were trying to, I saw one guy, I won't mention who it was, but he was doing his Zoom calls from from his kids' bunk beds. It was like, and he had these little round glasses, so it was something like Harry Potter. So he's definitely after a bigger bedroom once we came out of lockdown. And as you can see here, things like more gardens, or garden space, of course. So remember, if you flat, that communal gardens, which I do think developers do particularly well, very important. 3 beds, very popular. There is a lot of talk about rural living, but don't buy into that just yet. I'll come back to that. And of course, everybody does love a detached home if you can get one, not available to all. And you can see with some other stats, very similar, lots of people wanting to move to a different area. And of course, that's because you don't necessarily have to commute for the future. That's definitely what I do. I commute into London usually twice a week, but I live in the country, which I've always thoroughly enjoyed, and everybody's now catching up with us after COVID. And then on to the next slide. I think this one's quite interesting, because not everybody, don't believe what you always read on property in the papers, not everyone is leaving the city. So yes, people are looking to move to less urban areas, but you know what, if you were stuck in the country, and if you're a fairly young person, the idea of being stuck in the country during a lockdown was horrendous, and they are keen to move to the city. So really important not to kind of believe everything you read. Not everybody's rushing to the rural towns and cities, and we'll get a bit of a better idea about how that's going to change and how it will have changed from the next quarter. And finally, we're looking at really, I sort of sit there and think, well, that's all lovely, Kate, but how does that affect me? And it is all about you. Don't worry about what you read in the papers. Don't worry about what everybody's telling you it's going to happen to the market. Some people will always have to move, having a baby, getting divorced, getting married, in debt, whatever it might be. Think about why you're moving, and a lot of people, you might have to move. Don't let all the noise around the market worry you. If you're in a strong financial situation and you can afford to move, as people are, then do so, because if you find a property you like and you can put that decent roof over your head, that's what's important. Be aware of what you're worried about. Are you worried about house prices falling, or indeed are you worried they might go up even more next year and you can't buy? And you might be thinking, oh, what if I miss that stamp duty deadline? What I would say is worry more, less about the price that you pay, worry more about the cost of that property, which are incredibly low at the moment because of the mortgage rates that are available. And try, before you go in and buy, explain your worries and fears to people, because there's lots of ways that you can mitigate those. So if you're worried about losing your job, or you're worried about getting sick and not paying the mortgage, then I'm sure Matt can help you with that. So really think about that. Don't worry too much about the noise that's going around. It's about you, it's about the property you're selling potentially, and the property that you're buying. That's what's more important to focus on than worrying about all the stuff that we read in the papers.
Thanks so much, Kate. And Tom, what do you think?
Thanks, Natalie. I think Kate makes a really valid point there at the end. I think that is really, if you get one takeaway from this and from what everyone's saying today, it is about you and what it costs you and what is important to you. I think Kate's painted a very comprehensive picture of what's happening across the market as a whole. But from us on the ground here in Kent and what we're seeing in our local market, sort of echoes the sentiment that Kate has made. We are certainly seeing an increase in demand since the end of lockdown and across this year when compared to last year. Our applicants in our Southeast business, for example, this year are up 70%, and transactional activity as a result is also up. We are also seeing the movers from more urban areas, as Kate mentioned, and actually, whilst some of those areas we work in, such as the market towns, have always been popular for that, they provide now a good balance for that urban and rural mix. So people quite like a market town at the minute. And those market towns that were slightly further afield before, or those new housing developments which might have seemed slightly more remote for people that were commuting, are now more appealing to certain buyers, because the commute may be not 5 days a week anymore, it's 2-3 days a week. And a slightly longer commute is less onerous. So I think beforehand we were probably seeing people come looking for new homes in our patch, looking at maybe half an hour to 45 minutes. An hour and a half is no longer a long commute. I think obviously Kate touched on the drivers why people are moving: more garden, rural lifestyle. I think they've always been there, certainly for the Kent and East Sussex markets. That's kind of why you move here. I think the key thing that we're seeing is that COVID has accentuated that motivation to find those things now. So people might have been thinking about that as a 2-year, 3-year down the line kind of thing, but COVID has made, well, actually is now the right time to be looking for that. And that's kind of what we're seeing. I think why we see applicant levels maintaining a very strong level at the moment, and thus transactions following suit. We have been helped, I think, by the stamp duty holiday. Again, a real motivating factor and a driving factor for helping those applicants raise. And I think let's not forget the help to buy element. The change to help to buy comes into effect midway through December. The cap currently at 600,000. That rate, or the cap on value for our region in the southeast, falls to 437,500, so £437,500 for the next 2-3 years. So people who want to capitalise on that now, or reserve and transact at slightly higher property prices, can do so now, but they need to act fairly quickly. I would caveat that actually that average price that the cap is coming in is a sustainable price for our market, and you can still buy a lot at that price point if people are still looking to use Help to Buy. Obviously, Help to Buy is also going to be focused now on first-time buyers. So we probably will see some people who are not first-time buyers falling away. 75% of the transactions we are seeing using Help to Buy are first-time buyers anyway. So it shouldn't have too much of a negative impact once those changes come into play. I mean, I could go on, but ultimately, after lockdown, we've seen a very strong market, and the figures for the first half that we can report are strong. We see that going on through into the new year, and might be a slight change when stamp duty holiday ends and the change to Help to Buy, but we can't second guess the market, and as it stands, we are pleasantly surprised with how things are going.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for the really useful introduction to the 2020 market, both of you. So over the last few months, we've seen a huge shift in the way we live and use our homes, especially with home working and increased flexibility set to become a long-term staple in our lives. So with the role of our home needing to flex and adapt to our changing lifestyles, what's next? How much more multifunctional will our homes need to be, and how could this impact things like design or layout? So Kate, what are buyers wanting at the moment?
So in terms of what people are wanting, as you can see from what I mentioned before, definitely garden space. And again, that might be communal, that might be obviously in your own garden. That's very much what they're keen to have. Home working is definitely high on the list now for those people that are moving specifically for that, I think. So being able to have an extra office. I'm actually, this was my old office. I actually sit in the lounge these days with I've got so many dogs now that I can't fit them all in here. So being able to have a decent home office, and I mean, we were laughing a little earlier, the amount of times on the BBC that you see kids coming in and dogs coming in when they're on now, but I promise you, having had that happen to me several times, it's quite uncomfortable. So people really do want that sort of extra office space. And I've always thought, I mean, one of the things that I love about new build is that versus all of the kind of other properties around you, and I used to visit a lot when I was doing Part X, the thought and effort that goes into making sure that the property and the dimensions of the rooms and the flow through the house really make sure that for the future, that's a lovely home for the next 15 or 20 years that can adapt with your family. And I think that's what's really important is, you know, people live in their homes for a long time these days, particularly with the moves that are going on at the moment. So what you can see is, what's nice is when you walk into a house and you can see different uses for different rooms, I think. And you'll find that, I believe, a lot more with new build than you would with a second-hand home. So, you know, it's not all about swimming pools and jacuzzis and things like that. It's very, very much the functional use of space, of which, as I say, home working is now primary and important, or even just that space to be able to kind of get away from the world when you need to.
Thanks, Kate. And Tom, what are you seeing on the ground, and how else do you see our homes changing?
Gosh, I mean, Kate and I could probably talk for hours on this, with lots of cups of tea and coffee, with dogs running around in her lovely living room, which is very beamy and rural, I might add. I would echo all of those sentiments that Kate's mentioned. I think, just to go back to one point she meant, we are very fortunate with new homes and in the consultancy and what we deliver as product, in that we are able to adapt and listen to what the consumer wants. And we are able to shape and work on a blank canvas to provide homes that people want to live in and adapt to their changing needs. And I think that's very important, adapting to their changing needs. And actually, that is one of the most exciting things about the job that we do. We've just done a survey actually of our buyers this year, and we went out to about 1,400 people and asked them what was important and the motivating factor and what they were looking for in a home. And again, not to dwell on too many of the same points that Kate made, but garden is now more important than location sometimes. The home office piece is very key, and actually adapting spaces within your current home to be able to use that is quite important. We are often seeing now designs of new homes making more use of lobby and corridor space to house a desk potentially. So your corridor and your communal areas in your apartments or your houses actually become an additional room now. It's the multifunctional elements of rooms that are no longer pre-described, I think. So you have a lounge, but your lounge is not just your lounge where you sit and watch television anymore. It's your own dance studio, your yoga studio, where you do your exercise in a lockdown. So it's having the flexibility within those rooms and the space to accommodate different uses at different times of the day. We are spending a lot more times in our homes, let's not forget, as we stand, and people have a lot more time to think about how they use their homes. Does that mean that homes need to necessarily be larger? Perhaps in certain instances, and people are always very conscious about space, but not necessarily. It's about adapting the space that you've got and making the best use of the space and being efficient with that space. The only other thing I'd probably add that we haven't really talked about is the technology element and the importance of technology within the home. We are all working from home more, and my internet has just popped up to say it's unstable. A good internet connection to allowing more than more than one person to use a Zoom call or watch Netflix, etc., is paramount, and a sense of community and providing those amenity spaces where people, whilst they might have to interact at distance, can interact and have the accessibility and community on their doorstep, which is very important as well.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you to everyone who has been sending in their questions while we've been talking. Keep them coming in using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer as many as we can later. So much of the media is reporting, and Kate and Tom have also suggested that space is a big driver for those moving home, especially those leaving cities like London on the hunt for more of it. So Chelsea, how can a product like yours help those looking to move to pastures new do so?
So one of the most obviously exciting, benefits of the assisted sale scheme is it's such an effective way to help the Berkeley customer ultimately, get their new home. We take over the whole process for that customer. So from the initial valuation stage, we appoint 3 of the best agents in that area, to value the property for us and then ultimately market the property for us. We, before marketing, we also help and assist that customer, choose the best possible price for their home. So no matter what, the circumstances are at the moment with the market, we are there to guide them along the way. So once, let's say, with our product, when we're on the market for the customer, we are their liaison for the whole thing, whether that's, liaising with Berkeley Homes, agents, customers, we're there for them so we can really alleviate all that stress for the customer themselves. We also, not only do we look after the customers while they're on the market, once we sell their property and they're all sold, we also have one of the largest sales progression teams here that will assist the customer, obviously, for the most important part, to get them exchanged and completed. So without that, we wouldn't have anything. So like I say, we really do look after them from start to finish. And not only, obviously, well, if not one of the best things for the customer with our service that we can offer them with the assisted sale, they don't pay any agency fees. So like I say, we also alleviate that from them as well. So we really hopefully to be, like I say, a tool for the customer to ultimately get into their Berkeley home.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chelsea. Matt, in your role as a financial advisor, what is the lending market like currently, and what is the best advice you can give someone looking to buy a home at the moment, be it a person's first or second step?
Well, I've got a few words I could use to describe the way the market is at the moment. Some of them I wouldn't necessarily say on a Zoom call. It's been crazy, frankly. Just sort of following up on what Tom and Kate mentioned about the explosion of interest. And I think Kate demonstrated on her slides exactly what has happened since the first lockdown ended. From our point of view, the mortgage market is as busy as it's ever been. I think there is a juggling act going on at the moment between lenders. They are trying to remain competitive, trying to offer products, trying to be there for clients, whilst at the same time dealing with predominantly home working. Lots of people self-isolating and essentially sort of reduced capacity. So you've almost got this perfect storm right now of huge levels of demand, but also lender operations which aren't operating to their normal levels. Now, thankfully, the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks, we've seen things start to some of the interest rates that have come out of late. So there was an awful lot of news, and it was sort of bandied around the mainstream press throughout the summer that it became very tricky to get a 90% mortgage. At stages, it became tricky to get even an 85% mortgage. So those customers who with Help to Buy or shared ownership or equivalent scheme, it was tough. Now we have seen those sorts of products start to emerge again. I think the key element of that, and the most important thing from our point of view, is to begin with, there was some speculation that the lack of these products was due to the fact that lenders were perhaps concerned about the housing market. They thought that perhaps early next year, are we going to see something happen with prices negatively? And in fact, that isn't the case. We've spoken to a lot of the larger lenders at a level, and the indication is that the lack of 90% products and 85% products is lenders being concerned about the housing market. In fact, most of them have significantly revised up their predictions for next year. They're all looking at what's happened over the last 4 or 5 months and thinking, crikey, this is a sign of things to come. So I think from our perspective, it's starting to get better. There are areas of the market that are still very tricky. And of course, I'm biased, but I think you do need to go out and seek advice. There's never been a better time to talk to an advisor, talk to a broker who can help navigate these choppy waters. Because if you're self-employed, if you're normally in receipt of bonus or commission or overtime or additional hours, There are all sorts of new hoops that you've got to jump through from a mortgage point of view. It's possible. You can get a mortgage. The market is still very busy, but I would definitely say that you need to set aside an extra 2 to 3 weeks versus what you would ordinarily have to set aside to get a mortgage. But overall, I think from our point of view, that the last month or so has been a real move forward, and service has returned, albeit, you know, Tom touched on some pretty impending deadlines. I think if you are looking at the current Help to Buy scheme, you need to be getting that ball rolling within the next week or two, really, to have any chance of meeting those deadlines.
Thanks, Matt. So, Jazz, I'm going to ask you now about the legal side of buying a home. So, we know that we need a solicitor when purchasing a property, but why? What is it that you do that the buyer couldn't do themselves?
Well, I mean, in theory, I mean, you don't need a solicitor. You could go ahead and have an attempt at doing it yourself. But in practice, I don't think it would turn out very well. It's a bit like you could do your own appendix operation, but it's probably not advised. It just usually ends in horror. And at the end of the day, if you're getting a mortgage from a mortgage lender, they're going to want their security protected. So they're not going to want to proceed unless, you know, you are legally represented. I mean, as for the benefits of using a solicitor, you know, we try and take the stress of it all away from the client themselves by dealing with, you know, the nuances. There's a lot of legal terminology and leases and things like that. So we're very much the translators of that language into, you know, layman's terms. I suppose that every solicitor is going to try and make sure that the client understands and has an awareness of the property, of what they're buying, what they're entering into, so that when they come to resell it, you know, they've got good and marketable title on that. It's, you know, we act in the best interest of the client. You know, our retainer is with the client themselves. So we're never going to act in anyone else's best interest. We're never going to force them to do something that they don't want to do. And yeah, I mean, you know, if with Help to Buy and things like that, it all requires legal representation. They're not going to let anyone proceed by themselves and do things by themselves without having legal representation in place, just because of those security aspects. Solicitors also deal with the filing of the stamp duty returns and dealing with the management companies and registering the interest there as well. So yeah, it is something that is required in conveyancing if you're getting a mortgage, if you're, you know, using Help to Buy. But, you know, furthermore, I would say it's a common sense approach. You know, you should have it yourself. If you're buying a small piece of land at auction, you know, for a small amount of money, you could probably take a hit and have an attempt at doing it yourself. But when it comes to, you know, anything like a residential dwelling, you know, you do need to be legally represented. That's for sure.
Great, thanks, Jazz. And is there any difference in the process now as we're in a pandemic, such as socially distant key handovers?
Well, I think that, I mean, as for the key handover, the physical aspects of things like that, I think that's, you know, that's all been quite well managed by yourselves on site. But I mean, the first lockdown earlier in the year, you know, the housing market pretty much came to a complete halt. But the new build market recovered from that quite quickly on the conveyancing side, because it was a more manageable process, whereas the chain transactions, they're a bit more difficult to manage. The pandemic, I think, has affected more the Help to Buy scheme. There was a time when, you know, the return dates for the authorities to proceed went up to about 14 days. So that really caused a problem. But I think now that's come down. That's come down now to about 3 to 4 days. So that's been quite good. But the real issues in conveyancing at the moment caused by the pandemic, and in line with that, with the stamp duty, is just the unprecedented demand. You know, I mean, there's solicitors around who are turning away work. You know, they're actually saying, you know, we're full up. You know, there's no room at the inn, so to speak. So it's, you know, it's tough times. And where you've got the home working directive from the government, you've got people who are not working in the office that they're used to working in. So therefore talking about solicitors here only, but providing a bit of a reactive service while they're at home. Whereas you've then got this unprecedented demand in respect to the stamp duty and the Help to Buy stuff. So it's difficult to manage the processes. And I think it's that demand that's, you know, in line with the pandemic rather than the actual COVID issues. I think a lot of companies now have got the COVID stuff sorted out. You know, we've got screens in the office. We're a lot more prepared than we were back in March. but I think it's the demand in the market is the hard thing to manage. And I think, Matt touched on it. Getting anything out of a lender at the moment, it's impossible. Even simple redemption statement takes, days, whereas before it took hours. And it's not for want of trying. It's just because they don't have staff. Most companies have got staffing issues, people having to self-isolate, and putting on top of that all these unprecedented demands with SDLT, Help to Buy. It's a big rush, but I think everyone's trying their best.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jazz. So many thanks to all of you for those insights. So we're now going to go to questions from our audience. So firstly, we'll go through some of your pre-submitted questions, and then we'll turn to those which have been coming in whilst we've been talking. So do continue to use the Q&A function to ask our panel anything you want answered, and we'll try to get through as many as possible today. So let's have a look here. So first up, we have a question from Nicole, who has emailed in advance to ask, what advice would you give to a first-time buyer in the current market? So Nicole, there are a few different ways we can approach this. So I'm going to throw this to Tom first, and then I'll ask some of our other panel to give their perspective. So Tom, what advice would you give someone starting their search?
First time buyers, don't be scared about the process. There are plenty of people along the way to help you. We've touched on the financial consultants, the solicitors. Take advice from the right people and take your time. Whatever way you look at property, whether you're going to live in it or buying it as an investment, it is an investment for you and an emotional purchase for you. So take the time to make sure what you're buying exactly meets your requirements. Don't rush in, and consult with others around you who may well have been through that experience themselves, and talk through the consultants that you might meet, like Natalie on site, talk to the solicitors, talk to the financial advisors. And I think, importantly, it's not price, as Kate mentioned earlier, it's what costs you and can you afford it. And therefore, I think in the first instance, make sure you are talking to someone like Matt who can help you decide what it is you can afford, and then work out what it is you're really looking for and take the time to find it. It shouldn't be rushed. It's probably one of the most important decisions you're going to make. Once you're on the property ladder, you've got the experience, and it becomes easier. But it's a daunting process.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So from a financial viewpoint, Matt, what would you advise a budding first-time buyer does to get their money in order?
I definitely echo, as Tom said, I think there's often a bit of fear there. It's not as scary as you think. And I think there are plenty of people that want to help. What I'd add to that is about being prepared. And that's the key, particularly right now, whether we're talking about the mortgage side of things, whether you're talking about the legal side of things. I think the key is to have a real good understanding of what you can afford, because that will ultimately guide you on your search. There's nothing worse than sort of sitting there on a Saturday evening with a glass of wine and looking at a house and falling in love with it, booking a viewing, and then all of a sudden you discover that it's slightly beyond your reach. And we want to try and avoid that wherever we can. Similarly, it's not uncommon for us to talk to clients who've underestimated what they can do. I think because that fear is there, it's not unusual for somebody to really underestimate what's possible for them, particularly if they've only gone as far as a couple of online calculators or a brief conversation with a bank. I think for us, we like to talk to clients as early as possible in the process, because that should make that process much smoother from there on in. It's key that when you are talking to Tom or Tom's team, that you know where you are, what you can afford, and you've got a very good understanding of what that process looks for. So I would say being prepared for me is the absolute key.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. So Jazz, I'm going to come to you next. Is there anything on the legal side which you would advise Nicole does when starting her property journey? Jazz?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the question. Yeah, sorry, I can't see the question. I was on.
So So it's Nicole who emailed in. So what advice would you give to a first-time buyer in the current market? So anything on the legal side which you would advise Nicole does when starting her property journey?
Yeah, I mean, again, take the advice. I think Kate put it very well when she addressed matters at the beginning. It can be a very, very daunting experience. I mean, on the legals, you know, it's obviously everything's new. We've got some great guides, you know, on our website for first-time buyers. But you know, you tend to know. I've been there as well as a first-time buyer. You know, everybody becomes an economist, even yourself. You know, you read everything. You think that the whole market's going to crash, and you know everything's going to be absolutely terrible. And what if, and that cycle of what ifs can go on forever. But you know, if you speak to your mortgage broker, you know, about the worries and concerns you have, there are insurances that can be put in place. You know, if you feel as though the place is right and it ticks majority of the boxes, then yeah, for sure you should go for it. On the as for the legal side, always have a solicitor that you can speak to, because it is stressful as a first-time buyer, and that stress can kind of go up. If you're dealing with a firm that's a call center, it makes an already stressful process even worse. So just go and meet the person. I would say when it comes to legals on a first-time buyer, meet the person, speak to them, and that way it'll make that process easier. So that's my advice on that.
Okay, thanks, Jazz. So next up, we have a question from Nishant, who asks, how will Brexit, the trade deal, and COVID-19 affect the property market and the average first-time buyer? So it's quite a tricky one, but Kate, would you like to give some perspective on this?
Yes, stop worrying about it. I've been talking to people who have been terrified about this for the last 3 years. And you think where we were 3 years ago, everybody thought Brexit was going to crash the market and everything was going to go pear-shaped. So everybody waited and they had babies and they maybe got divorced throughout that. So the kind of what they wanted to do didn't happen. And then a great example actually is of getting on the market when it suits you, rather than try to get on the market when you think there's going to be a great deal available, which is what everybody wants, particularly when it's for your home and particularly when costs are so low. You imagine somebody in March who had worked really hard to get their 5% deposit together, really hard, and they started looking for property. Then we went into COVID and they carried on looking for property. What happens when we came out? You can't get 95% mortgages unless, of course, you're doing Help to Buy. So, and then they've missed out on 3 or 4% house price growth by the end of this year. So yes, it might have gone the other way, but actually I've had family I've been advising to buy straight after we got out of COVID, even if house prices had dropped, because at the end of the day, as long as you can hold on to that property, and when you get on the ladder, you're going to get onto it for 60 years, you'll make some money out of some property, you might lose some on others, and some of them might stay the same. I haven't been in it for quite 60 years, but I know the numbers and that's about right. So it's one of those things, all that noise, as I say, that scares the living daylights out of you, stop worrying about it. Brokers are nice people. Lenders will do their best to give you that money. People like Tom and Jazz, they will look after you, and particularly having a good legal company is kind of really important. So the whole thing with this is just stop worrying about the noise, because it's headlines and it's about you making the right decision, putting that roof over your head when it suits you, and not worrying about what's going on in the market. Because if you try and time in and time out of the market, the only thing I can guarantee is I would fail to do that, and I know pretty much every stat going. So don't bother. Get there. If you find a nice property that you like, property is in a lot of places in quite short demand, get in, make sure you get those insurances, and somebody like Matt is essential during this time if you're worried about not being able to, prices falling or getting sick, as I said before. So it is absolutely, just ignore all of that and worry about you, and talk to these guys that are here who are experts, because they've done this hundreds if not thousands of times before, and they'll know how to help you, and trust them. Friends and family, much as I love mine, they're not always the best people to turn to at times like this.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Kate. So we have got time potentially just to do one more quick question. So this has come through from Alina, who asks, what is the process of selling my home in the current market? So perhaps Jazz, we start with you here, and then Chelsea can step in just to talk through some of the practicalities.
Yeah, so house sales, yeah, it's pretty much easy, very much easy. You know, to get an offer on it, I'm sure it'll get snapped up very quick. And then, yeah, engage with the solicitor once the estate agents issue the memorandum of sale. The ball can start rolling. The only, obviously, difference is that then your buyer, you know, the buyer has to do the work, really. When you come to sell a property, I mean, from a solicitor's point of view, we get the office copies, we get a redemption statement, we get a contract signed, and we're ready to sell. It's the buyer who will be constrained with getting mortgage, getting searches, because there's big search delays with local authorities at the moment due to COVID. So it's the buyer that has a bit more work to do. But so long as you're organised, I would say probably even before you get a buyer, it might be worth filling out your property information forms, your fittings and contents forms. And with some of my clients, particularly the ones where we're selling probate properties and things like that, we're actually telling the sellers to do a local authority search themselves. That way, you can give the buyer a full pack so that there's no, you know, you can minimize the delays on that front. So going into this market, if you're looking to sell before that stamp duty deadline, it might be worth spending, for the sake of 100 quid, just doing a local authority search yourself, having it on file, which you can pass to your buyer. It just cuts out one of those steps, because that's where on the normal residential domestic market, that's where the delays have felt, is with the mortgages. And again, not down to brokers or anything like that, but just down to lenders and underwriters. And with local authority searches, it's the third parties that you just can't control at the moment.
That's great, thanks Jazz. And Chelsea, what can you add to help Alina with her question on the process?
So, yeah, perfect. So just really, obviously, to come back on what Jazz said as well, we are here to liaise with all the third parties so that customer doesn't have to. So like I say, when you come to local searches, we will liaise with the, you know, solicitors, and we will help with that conveyancing process. So we can, because there's so much to take in. There really is still, it would be such a scary process for anyone, you know, hearing all these different terminologies. So that's what we're here for. We will liaise with everyone for them to ultimately marry it all up for them and get them exchanged and completed. If they are worrying about, you know, way at the beginning, you know, how viewings and valuations with agents are taking place given the current circumstances we are in, it's, you know, down to them, because it's business as usual for us agents, solicitors. So, you know, we tailor, you know, to whatever that customer or vendor, feels comfortable with. We will, you know, the agents are prepped and primed with the relevant, you know, PPE, as it's, you know, it's a new world now. So like I say, we will make sure that customer feels comfortable with, you know, we do online viewings, virtual tours. So it really is down to the customer and what they're happy with. But like I say, it's not stopped. So like I say, it's still such a great time to sell, but it's just a new way of working at the moment, but we can tailor it around the customer for them.
That's great. Thanks, Chelsea. So we're actually coming to the end of our session today. So thank you for everyone who has sent their questions in. I'm sorry we have not been able to get to everyone, but if you have asked something that you're keen to get answered and we haven't made it to you, please contact Berkeley and we'll endeavour to get a response to you from the appropriate panellist. So thank you to our audience today for joining, and for our panellists, Jazz, Matt, Kate, and Chelsea, and also not forgetting Tom, for their time and insights, and we do hope you found it a valuable session. So once again, thank you very much everyone, have a great afternoon and goodbye.